So courage is not the absence of fear or uncertainty. I don't believe that's true. The fear of failure and what ifs is real and it's paralyzing. I've experienced that. It's also not the gung-ho, can do lah, let's do it. It's not. I think courage is the act of taking just the next step. Just the next step, despite our fears and our uncertainties. John Ortberg, in his book, If You Want to Walk on Water, You've Got to Get Out of the Boat, he said, I think God says, fear not so often, because fear is the number one reason human beings are tempted to avoid doing what God asks them to do. The second quality is courage. Be courageous. Tell your neighbor, courage. Type in the chat, courage. Verse 9 of Joshua 1. It says, have I not commanded you? This is the Lord saying to Joshua, be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Now, Joshua first exhibited courage when he first appeared on the scene. Exodus 17, facing the Amalekites. He was first, that was his first appearance, but that was also the first battle that Israel had when they left Egypt. And who were these who came after them? They were called the Amalekites. Wild desert nomads. And this attack was not provoked. This attack was sudden. This attack was vicious because they thought that Israel would be easy meat, just coming out from slavery, right? We just attacked them. So they ambushed. The Amalekites ambushed Israel. But Joshua was called to fight. Can you imagine? Young man, right? Never fought before. He was called to fight. And Joshua could not go up to them and say, hey, you guys go fly a kite. Because there were too many Amalekites. But as you read this story, amazing story, that because of supernatural aid, right? He won a decisive victory over the Amalekites. But that's not astonishing. Look at what the Lord said to Moses to do. Exodus 17:14. The Lord telling Moses, right? Write this as a memorial in a book and recite it in the ears of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under the heaven. Why? Why should you do that, right? I tell you, write it down, but in the hearing of Joshua. Because in one sense, Joshua was earmarked to be the leader, to fight. That was his first battle, but that was not going to be his last battle. So Joshua was already prepared to take on many more kings and nations. Okay, so he was courageous. He was also very courageous in following God's instructions to take the promised land. Numbers 14, remember the story of the 12 spies coming back with the report? He was among the 12 spies. And the 10 spies says, no go, they're too strong. But listen to what Joshua himself said in Numbers 14, 8, 9. He said, if the Lord delights in us, He will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord. And do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their protection is removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. But despite his words, right, of faith, they didn't go. So, but Yahweh's promise was continually upon Joshua. Verse 7 of Deuteronomy chapter 31. Then Moses summoned Joshua and said to him in the sight of all Israel, be strong and courageous, for you shall go with this people into the land that the Lord has sworn to their fathers to give them, and you shall put them in possession of it. It is the Lord who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you or forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed. So with these numerous reminders to be strong and to be courageous, Joshua was able to take decisive action to take the land even after Moses' death. We see him in the early book of Joshua that he directed Israel in a preparation and consecration before they invaded Canaan. Then he led Israel against Jericho, right? By following what? This 6+7 encircling of the walls of Jericho. And then the walls came tumbling down. So at the end, by Joshua chapter 12, right, the middle of that, when all the dust has settled, a total of 31 kings and 6 nations were defeated, by Joshua. So he really took heed to what the Lord said. Be strong. Do not be dismayed. I have given you the land. So it took Joshua great courage to follow God's ways, especially sometimes when his ways seems odd, unorthodox, or even downright illogical. But I think the greatest place where Joshua exhibited courage was in rebounding from setbacks. How many of you have ever experienced a setback, a failure, something, you expected it to go this way and it didn't go, and it was a setback. You know this setback, it was at the place of AI. We can pronounce I. If you say AI, then you know the Lord has something to say about AI. Okay, side. Anyway, so from their easy victory, so-called easy victory because it was supernaturally aided, Jericho's walls came down, right? So the next place was Ai. And they said, wow, Ai is quite small, not so strong. Just send 3,000 men and we should do the job. So 3,000 men went, right? They thought it was easy peasy. And they came back defeated. So at this point, Joshua was a bit confused. He thought the Lord had abandoned them. You gave us easy victory over Jericho, which was like formidable. And this one, simple one, we lost. What's going on? And then the Lord said, get up. Israel has sinned. Get up. Consecrate yourselves. See, the Lord also knew that this setback would drag them down, would drag Joshua's faith down. It would drain him from his enthusiasm and would cause the hearts of the people to melt. You see what the Lord said in Joshua chapter 8, verse 1. And the Lord said to Joshua, do not fear and do not be dismayed. Take all the fighting men with you and arise, go up to Ai. See, I have given into your hand the king of Ai and his people, his city, and his land. Joshua needed courage to pick himself up from his failures and his missteps and not allow them to prevent Israel from fulfilling what God's destiny was for her. God's faithful servants need courage to step out in things never done before, encountering situations never encountered before, COVID. To follow God's instructions to the dot and to rise above failures and setbacks so as to reach God's purposes for us. Now, years ago, there was a service that I was in charge of when I first came to Grace Assembly. A service it was an evening service, not the regular service. So I was in charge of that service. And as the service was progressing, I looked at it and I felt it was bad. I was going bad. I think ultimately it bombed. And as I was sitting there, I felt my ears getting hot and red with embarrassment. I said, wow, this is going terribly. And I'm new at Grace. So last time we used to have at the level 3 our offices. So when the service was over, I quickly ran out to my office. And then I went there. What was I doing, I was doing the cool thing. I was waiting for everybody to go home before I dared to appear again. So I hid myself in the room. I said, Lord, how am I ever going to recover from this embarrassment? It was so bad, the service was so bad. I felt responsible for it, and it was so bad. And so I stayed and I watched from my window. In those days, you can and see where all the cars go and all the people go. Safe. I said, Lord, you have to help me. I surrender this whole thing to you. You have to help me. Either you deliver me or you take me home. I guess he didn't answer the second prayer. So you need courage. No, but you don't understand courage if everything is fine, and you're moving from one success to the other. What's courage, right? You just write on your previous success. But when you have a setback and a failure, when you hear God say, take courage, it means different things. It means you must get up, face the crowd, face your embarrassment, and move on. So that was years ago. I doubt any of you were there. Thank God. But never mind. So courage is not the absence of fear or uncertainty. I don't believe that's true. The fear of failure and what ifs is real and it's paralyzing. I've experienced that. It's also not the gung-ho, can do lah, let's do it. It's not. I think courage is the act of taking just the next step. Just the next step, despite our fears and our uncertainties. John Ortberg, in his book, If You Want to Walk on Water, You've Got to Get Out of the Boat. He said, I think God says, fear not so often, because fear is the number one reason human beings are tempted to avoid doing what God asks them to do. Today, we are in a culture that's called the cancel culture, which produces a fear in us that anything we say or do that's contrary, right, or offensive to the prevailing norms and values, what we are shown no mercy. We are cancelled. We are cancelled. So while this is not a reason to be offensive, right, I think we need to consider very carefully, we need to weigh carefully the consequences of sometimes not speaking up when it's needful and when it's just. And when we refrain from testifying to the gospel of Christ when we're given opportunities, because we what? We fear being cancelled. But anything that God asks us to do requires what? Two things: courage and faith. Courage and faith. And so to be faithful in serving our call, we need to be courageous. To be courageous means we can't be waiting for, the applause of the crowd or the affirmation of our culture before we obey God's command. To be courageous is to believe that God will enable us for the task He has appointed us. So be strong and courageous. God doesn't call only the courageous, but we must take courage to act on our call.